So we've just heard from everybody here, um, lots of different inspirations that come from the natural world, and I was interested that everybody. It seemed like people didn't find it difficult to find something that inspired them from the natural world, and these examples went from the very big, like the stars and the sky and the wind, to the very very small, to kind of like a grub that's you know seen in the earth, in a garden or in an allotment, um, and that these are all around us all of the time, the big and the small, and here we are in the midst of this, with our plans and our ideas and our concerns and perhaps our rankings of what and who is good and bad. And I guess I'm just suddenly reminded of the kind of the famous quote from Hamlet where Shakespeare says, you know, nothing is either good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. And kind of modern cognitive science points to something very similar, that it's actually the power of our judgments and our perceptions that um, put value on particular experiences from this cognitive point of view. And yet, that doesn't mean that kind of that there isn't perhaps a sense of intrinsic value, but that it's found in a different way. And I don't know. As I was listening to everybody speaking, and hearing these different examples, each one was touching me. I could feel some of the joy and some of the kind of the beauty that came from these very big and very small examples, and the all around. So there's something that kind of like touches below thinking, that, at least I speak for myself, that I'm easily touched by when it comes to natural examples. And it's one of the premises of the new report from the Mindfulness Initiative, which is called Reconnection. That tapping in this way, that actually pausing to reconnect to the world as it is actually a source of great, a different kind of power, perhaps, and that maybe some of the reasons why we seem to find it very easy to cause harm to this world, and indeed to each other as human beings, as well as to the natural world, is somehow to do with our inattention or our misdirected attention. That we're continually applying certain kinds of thought which separates us from one another, kind of separates us into right and wrong and good and bad, and my favorite and not my favorite. But that somehow at the same time disconnects us from the sort of and there isn't really a word for it, but the kind of the sort of isness of life that we can perhaps connect to when we are in touch with the world around us, in the ways that everyone here was describing when they spoke about what inspired them in nature. So it's somehow being apart from the natural world, and perhaps in another way apart from each other. When we separate ourselves into camps of one kind or another, that we create much greater possibility for harm. Because once we're in a camp, the other camp's wrong, and then we maybe want to do them harm, or we fear that they're going to do us harm. And in the same way, then if the natural world is threatening to us, then we might want to dominate it, or perhaps we see opportunities in it to kind of make more of something, whether that's collecting oil or making money or, or finding safety. So it's the quality of our attention actually that creates the sort of disharmony, kind of the properties of un unfettered thinking, and the way that the mind's thinking naturally seems to, or automatically seems to, lead to splitting off and to judging, and then that judging leading to some kind of struggle, because once there's a right and a wrong, there's got to be some kind of struggle between what should be happening and what shouldn't be happening. And that actually below all of this activity, which we're really familiar with, I imagine, all of us, because we all have these minds that think and think and think and are continually judging and comparing and categorizing. Below that, there is the possibility, in stillness particularly, of dropping into a space of kind of basic okayness, where we're in touch with the seedling that's growing, or the sunset that's happening, and that doesn't actually really concern itself with whether we've had a good or a bad day. It's just there being beautiful, or the grub that's kind of just going about its business in the earth. So mindfulness practice, in one sense, is very simple. It's about reconnecting to this non-judgmental presence that is completely our birthright, that actually just by very dint of our having bodies and being able to feel and see or hear or sense in any way, by being sentient, it's ours. It's just that the patterns of inattention and the patterns of busyness and the patterns of grasping and the patterns of being so concerned with getting away from what might be threatening to us, or getting to what we think will make our lives better, means that we perhaps lose touch with this kind of this sort of intrinsic source of okayness that can be found in the natural world. In fact, is the natural world, with its rhythms, with its perhaps qualities of not being rushed. I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried to rush a plant to bloom. It doesn't work, does it? If you try and pick the flowers, come on, bloom quickly, let's do it. Yeah, you kill the flower if you try and do that. Or we were hearing about the lambs being born. That's something that can only happen in lambing season. Just as other natural processes are inherent in the environmental conditions that bring them about. So not only do we tend to start harming ourselves, others, and the world when we are caught up in our thinking. And by the way, I really don't mean to denigrate thinking. It's a wonderful capacity when it's a kind of a servant of our being rather than the master of our being. Ian McGilchrist has written a very sort of intricate and large book called The Master and His Emissary, where he talks about the two different hemispheres of the brain and how these relate to these different qualities of kind of thinking and then a kind of a more holistic kind of, if you like, being mode, as we call it in mindfulness training. And he called it The Master and His Emissary because there's a famous story about kind of an emissary of a leader who starts to think they're so good that they take over, and then the kind of like the empire crumbles because what was supposed to be a servant tries to take over, and then that leads to disaster. And so it's the kind of a metaphor for our own, how our thinking minds are hugely powerful, but when we start to believe what they're saying the whole time, and not see them just as a part of who we are, then trouble comes. So, where mindfulness is and nature, therefore, are resources, because the natural world perhaps calls us into mindfulness. It's there already. And I'm sure many of us have had these experiences in kind of still, beautiful locations, perhaps with the very big or even the very small, when we're attending to it. Naturally calls us into this joyful, blissful presence in the midst of the vastness, or seeing the very smallness of something. And in the same way, in meditation practice, by attuning to nature, we can also perhaps tap into these qualities which actually call to our being, just to be a part of this process, not to try to dominate it or to try to get everything that we want from it, because inevitably there's some luck involved and some mystery involved, isn't there? One person, and I'm not naming people because this might go onto YouTube, but one person was mentioning earlier about kind of like the uncertainty of whether a plant will bloom. We don't know. It might work. We can water it and we can nurture it and we can give it good ground, but there's some uncertainty here. There'll be some good fortune and there'll be some mystery involved. So with any other process, there aren't any guarantees. But we can invest without perhaps getting caught up in the investment. We can invest ourselves in being a part of this remarkable world, and perhaps give up the sense of needing to be all powerful, or having to get everything sorted, or having to fix everything that's wrong. And this will be familiar to those of you who are familiar with meditation practice, where we drop into these qualities of staying present with what is, of living the moment with all of its fullness, including its difficulty as well as its beauty and pleasures, of not trying to get to some other state, and of trusting, just like we might trust a seed to know how to grow, i.e. mostly we leave it alone once we put it in the ground. So if we can trust our own place in the wider biosphere, then generally speaking, we actually tap into a well-being that doesn't require very much else. And that's not to say that we won't experience pain in our life, or loss in our life, or difficulty, but that we can, with these capacities to rest in the flow of life, we can meet them with skillful qualities like equanimity and wisdom, and perhaps insight, in ways that are not possible in the same ways when we're dominated by trying to either think our way out or fight our way out, or avoid everything that we don't like. So the suggestion of the Mindfulness Initiative's Reconnection Report, well, one of the suggestions that is, if we can tap into this, then maybe this will help, but not as a kind of like a magic cure for the climate crisis. That would be another form of kind of egotism to say we can just throw mindfulness at it, but that there may be something in here which we can tap into, which might help in the same way as mindfulness courses and mindfulness programs can be a source of resourcing ourselves in the kind of the smaller ways in our own lives and in our own communities. So if you want to remember any of this, because I've done a lot of talking, I'm going to stop in a minute. Maybe just look at whatever it is that inspires you. Hear it. Tune into these moments when we're perhaps in touch, even if it's just the kind of feeling of our body breathing in and out, or the miracle of oxygen going in through the nose, and like, wow, every time, alive, being conscious to it all. that all of this is kind of beyond our kind of creation, and instead is a sort of a mystery of being that is wonderful if we're willing to pay attention to it. I hope that makes some sense. And if it doesn't, then we're going to drop into a practice anyway, which may make more sense than me speaking about it. So I'm just going to do a little pause.